The first time people saw me driving that yellow bulldozer straight through a half-built community center, they thought I'd finally lost my mind. And honestly, I can't blame them. A 72-year-old retired mailman, white hair flying in the wind, smashing concrete walls while a bunch of construction workers ran for their lives. Yeah, from the outside, it probably looked like the world's slowest midlife crisis. But here's the thing. That building wasn't just concrete and bricks. It was sitting right on top of my wife's garden. And the man screaming at me to stop the HOA president in his shiny suit had spent 30 years trying to steal my land. So if you're wondering why a quiet old grandfather ended up roaring through a construction site like an angry bull, well, pull up a chair. Let me tell you how it all happened. I've lived in the same house for 45 years. Small white place, blue shutters, red front door. Betty picked those colors back when we were newly married, said the house needed something cheerful. I kept it exactly the same after she passed because every time I look at that red door, I can almost hear her laugh. Our home sits on 3 acres just outside a little town called Maplewood. Back when Betty and I moved there, it was nothing but farmland and open sky. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away. At night, we'd sit on the porch with coffee watching the stars spill across the sky like someone had kicked over a bucket of diamonds. But time has a funny way of changing places. Developers started buying up the farms. Then came the mansions. 3-car garages, swimming pools, landscaping so perfect it looked like the grass had been combed with a ruler. They called the neighborhood Maplewood Estates. My little house suddenly looked like a stubborn dandelion growing in the middle of a rose garden. And the people who moved in there, well, some of them didn't appreciate the dandelion. About 15 years ago, they formed a homeowners association, an HOA. Now, if you've never dealt with one, let me explain something real quick. An HOA is basically a group of neighbors who get together and decide they're the fashion police for your house. Wrong mailbox color, violation. Grass too tall, violation. Truck too old, you guessed it, violation. The funny thing is, my property was older than the HOA itself. My grandfather bought that land back in 1923. Their little rule book didn't apply to me. So whenever they mailed me those nasty letters complaining about my vegetable garden or the birds I fed in the yard, I just tossed them straight into the trash. Life went on. Until 3 months ago. That's when the snake showed up. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the porch drinking my coffee, the same spot Betty and I used to watch the sunrise together. Then this long black luxury car rolled up my driveway. Out steps a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. He walks up like he owns the place. "Mr. Mitchell." "That's me," I said. He hands me a card. "Richard Crane, attorney for Maplewood Estates, HOA. Right then, I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. He sat down on my porch without even asking, opened that fancy briefcase, and started explaining how the HOA was building a new recreation center. Pool, tennis courts, meeting hall, all the usual nonsense rich neighborhoods like to brag about. I nodded politely. "Sounds nice," I said. Then he slid a map across the table. And that's when things got ugly. According to their survey, part of the building would extend onto my land. Half an acre. Now, half an acre might not sound like much, but that piece of land was Betty's garden. 30 years of roses. The wooden bench where I still sat every evening talking to her. He offered me $20,000 for it. $20,000 for the place where my wife's memory lived. I stood up and told him something very simple. That land isn't for sale. His smile got colder. "Mr. Mitchell, the HOA has ways of making things difficult for people who don't cooperate. You ever hear a threat dressed up as polite conversation?" "Yeah." That was one of them. He drove away. And something about his confidence bothered me. So the next morning I walked out to the edge of my property. That's when I saw the orange construction fence. It had been moved 50 feet onto my land. Behind it, fresh dirt. Digging. Right where Betty's garden used to be. The roses were gone. The bench was gone. Just bulldozed earth. I dropped to my knees right there in the dirt. 40 years of memories erased in one afternoon. But grief has a funny twin brother. His name is anger. And by the time I stood up again, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was planning. First call I made was to my old friend Tom Bradley. Tom spent 40 years working as a land surveyor. If someone had messed with my property lines, he'd know. Next day, he came out with his equipment. 2 hours later, he looked at me and said something that changed everything. "They moved your markers. Someone had pulled the iron boundary pins out of the ground and planted new ones closer to my house. Basically, they tried to shrink my land, but here's where they screwed up. When my grandfather bought the property a century ago, the survey referenced permanent landmarks, like an old oak tree at the corner of the field. That tree was still standing. Tom measured from it. And guess what? My land extended exactly where it always had. The HOA wasn't just being pushy. They had stolen half an acre. And when I checked the county records, I found the worst part. A document claiming I'd sold the land, signed with my name. Except I never signed it. Forged. And that's when the twist hit me like a lightning bolt. The HOA president's name was Gerald Patterson. 30 years earlier, he worked for the county planning department. He was the man who tried to buy my land for a highway project. I said no back then. And apparently, he never forgot it. So he waited 3 decades. Then he finally found a way to take it. That's when my granddaughter Emily stepped in. She was in law school, smart as a whip. She looked at the evidence and said 3 words that made me grin like a kid. Grandpa, fight back. Turns out state law says something interesting. If someone builds on your property without permission, you can remove the construction legally. All you have to do is give them written notice. So we did. 7 days. Stop building or I remove it myself. They laughed, sent lawyers, tried to intimidate me. So on day 7, I rented a bulldozer, which brings us back to the moment you saw at the beginning. That yellow machine roaring across the dirt, workers scattering, Gerald Patterson screaming like someone had set his suit on fire. You can't do this. I looked down at him and said the only thing that mattered. You had 7 days. Then I pushed the lever. Concrete walls collapsed like dominoes. Dust filled the sky. And I swear, every brick that fell felt like justice. At one point, I climbed down and found something in the rubble. A single rose. One of Betty's roses, somehow still alive. I put it in my pocket. Right about then, the police arrived. Sirens, lights, confusion everywhere. But when I showed them the deed, the survey, the forged documents, everything changed. Within hours, the district attorney got involved. Turns out forging property documents, moving survey markers, and tricking a sick elderly man into signing paperwork, those are serious crimes. Gerald Patterson and the HOA lawyer ended up under criminal investigation. And the real twist, every single brick they built on my land legally belonged to me, including the foundation, which meant the HOA had accidentally built a $500,000 structure on my property. After a week of national news coverage and public outrage, the HOA showed up at my door with a settlement offer, $300,000, restoration of Betty's garden, and a legally binding agreement to never come near my land again. I took the deal, not because I needed the money, but because peace was worth more than revenge. A month later, I sat on the rebuilt bench in Betty's garden, roses blooming again, birds singing, morning sun warm on my face. I kept my promise, I told her. And you know something strange? After all that, the neighborhood started treating me differently. People waved, brought cookies, stopped to chat. Apparently, when a quiet old man destroys a building with a bulldozer, people start respecting your property line real fast. But the biggest lesson I learned from all this wasn't about bulldozers or lawsuits. It was about something simpler. Bullies only look powerful until someone stands up to them. And sometimes, the person who stands up isn't a billionaire or a politician. Sometimes it's just a stubborn old grandfather who refuses to let someone erase his memories. Now, I've got a question for you. If someone destroyed something that meant everything to you, your family's land, your memories, the place you loved most, would you have done what I did? Or would you have handled it differently? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. And if you've ever had to stand up to someone abusing their power, share that story too. Because sometimes the little guy wins, and those stories deserve to be told.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.